Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we have a vintage Hall of Fame review on my absolute favorite Calvin Klein fragrance. It is from the year 1981, which as you all know is kind of a Hall of Fame vintage year. And it was actually my signature scent the entire Father's Day weekend. I made a video on Friday afternoon and I said I was going to make this Father's Day weekend a vintage Father's Day weekend, and it ended up being a weekend dedicated completely to Calvin by Calvin Klein, and we'll talk a little bit about why. But this is the vintage original release, basically pardon me. I had a very filling Father's Day dinner with my parents, and my mom basically stuffed me to the brim, and so here I am burping on the first minute of a video, so apologies. But Calvin by Calvin Klein was originally released in the year 1981. It was discontinued in 1990. And if you have a bottle that in a box that does not have a barcode on it, which mine does not, you have an original bottle and box, because this was basically re-released in 1999 for the millennium, is apparently what some folks were saying. That seems a little strange to me, but apparently it was. And that re-release bottle and box will have a barcode on the packaging somewhere. So if you have a pre-barcode, you can kind of tell it's one of the original releases. This is labeled as a cologne, which, as we'll talk about, I think this is the strongest cologne in my collection, honestly. Like, if you made me rank my colognes, this would be number one as far as strength goes. The thing is an absolute monster and beast. It was my signature scent all Father's Day weekend. I've worn it. I've had this bottle for years and years now. I know this fragrance like the back of my hand. In fact, I'm going to spray some on the back of my hand as requested by some folks, but let's do a fresh little spray here. I'm going to go to the gym after this too. I'm just going to reek like 1981. Oh my God. So as I said, I wanted to do this review Friday evening. And I took my daughter to go see Inside Out 2 after I picked her up. I had her all Father's Day weekend. It was fantastic. Took her to see Inside Out 2. I liked the movie, but there was a part of it that just made me go, ugh, Disney. But not going to talk about that. And then on Saturday, I ended up finishing a book I was reading for the second time called Drawing of the Three, which is a little confusing, but for the second time I finished The Drawing of the Three. And I was just turning pages and reading them before I knew it was midnight. I was like, that's it. I'm just absolutely knackered. So here we are, Father's Day. After spending all day with the family, at the end of the day, I get to do a vintage Hall of Fame review. And you do have to be a little bit in the mood to do these type of reviews. You know, this is a special fragrance. It's been discontinued for a long time. It is probably my favorite Calvin Klein fragrance, as I said. It sort of just barely scrapes past Obsession for Men, which I will review one of these days. I do have a full review of Obsession for Women on the channel if you'd like to check that out. But so again, this came out in 1981. The original packages were distributed by Calvin Klein Cosmetics, which is very important. This is actually a splash bottle here. This is a cologne splash bottle. So 1981, one of the most notorious years, in vintage perfume. And what never ceases to amaze me about Calvin by Calvin Klein. Well, actually, first, let's do the note listing thing, because if you've never smelled this, this is a very traditionally masculine fragrance. Let's say it's very 1980s, very late 70s even, 1980s. It opens up with bergamot, mandarin orange, neroli, lemon, chamomile, and this mugwort note, if you will, and neroli, if I didn't say that, heart of geranium, cinnamon leaf, tarragon, orange blossoms, and vervain, lemon vervain. And the base notes of oak moss, musk, patchouli, sandalwood, and vetiver. The perfumer is actually listed as IFF. So on Parfumo, which I love using, it shows IFF as the perfumer, which is International Flavors and Fragrances. So they don't actually list just one perfumer from IFF. I don't know if it was like a collaboration and IFF just gets the designation or what, but just lists IFF as the perfumers. Okay, so that's the note listing and the breakdown. So what never ceases to amaze me about Calvin is how it opens up with one of the most singular, perfectly sharp iterations of a sharp fougere. It literally, to me, is a very sharp take on a fougere, right? It is very of its time because it smells like some of the most popular fragrances of the day with a little bit of a twist is basically what it smells like. It's very pungent on the nose. Like right now, this fragrance is strong as hell. I bet if I walked out on the street, everyone on the block would smell me. It is the strongest cologne I think I've ever come across in my collection and ever smelled, to be quite honest. Just a cologne strength. This thing is absolute beast. And I'm not counting like the cologne concentrates, which are really like an eau de toilette. This is a true cologne. And it just goes to show how far I think we've fallen in perfumery, that now a cologne from 1981 absolutely wipes the floor with the modern eau de toilette and eau de parfums and all that stuff, right? Chris from Scentland would say this puts those in the corner, all right? And so it does smell very pungent and sharp from the beginning. And if anyone wonders why I love vintage perfume, like if you're somebody who's like, why in the world would you want to hunt down an old fragrance? If you're a frag head and you've never smelled something like this is a perfect example, absolutely perfect example of something I think you need to get your nose on. Also, kind of a reference oak moss scent. I think if you came to me and said, I really want to see what oak moss does in a perfume, this would be the one. The oak moss literally makes the fragrance just reek off of your skin. I mean, it literally reeks in the best way possible, okay? So when you wear this, you literally just radiate Calvin, which is not something you would expect from a cologne concentration, but that's exactly how this wears on my skin. This is like a 12-hour wear. I swear to God, it's a 12-hour cologne wear. And some say that Calvin by Calvin Klein has this sort of tannin or almost like chemical-like smell in the opening. It's very grating, like almost like a man that hasn't shaved in a little bit. There's this grating feel to it. And I love how powerful and strong that the fragrance wears. It almost feels like the fragrance has a personality of its own. And that's one of the things I loved about old fragrances from the glory years of perfume, quite frankly. They have personality to them. They're not just bland, copycat, drones, clones, whatever you want to call them, you know? They're not trying not to offend anyone. This is somebody that's like, fuck you, get out of my way. You know what I mean? If you don't like it, fuck you as well. It just has that sort of feel about it. And I absolutely love that. It's like, you know, being in New York City. It's like someone says, fuck you. You say, fuck you too. And then you guys can hug and be best friends right after that. After you've had the fuck you exchange, you can be friends with that person. This lands right in my strike zone. It really lands right in my strike zone because the fragrance has personality, but it also has class. Like I would have no problem wearing this to a very, very important business meeting. In fact, if you were wearing this as a man in his late 30s, if I wore this to a very important business meeting and there are people who are older than me in there, which is pretty common usually. I mean, I'm starting to get to that age where I work with folks that are also younger. It used to be I was the youngest kid on the block forever doing what I did. And then now I'm starting to get to that age where there's some younger, but still a lot of folks are older than me. They would definitely appreciate this scent profile. So what is this? So what does it smell like? So it basically opens up with this very sharp and attention-grabbing combination of citruses, tarragon, and mugwort. Those three combinations start right on my skin. The mugwort is crisp and strong, but also very woody and herbaceous. It gives it a little bit of a green tint, okay? And a little bit of a green undertone, if you will, a woody green undertone to the citruses. The tarragon gives the fragrance, it's almost anise-like sharpness, okay? And that opening of anise, sharp anise-like smell with that little green tint will remind you of fragrances that were so popular in the late 70s, specifically things like Azzaro, which only came out a couple years before. You know, this was a huge hit. Gerard Anthony, one of the greatest perfumers of all time. This will definitely get a Vintage Hall of Fame review. But I could totally see the folks at Calvin, while they were releasing their very first masculine, by the way. If I didn't mention this, this is the very first masculine fragrance for men. Looking at what was so popular back then and riffing off of it a little bit. So if you can just imagine a fragrance that starts off even sharper than Azzaro Pour Homme. It's so sharp in its opening, I think it would almost put you off. Honestly, I think it would almost put most people off, except for this brilliant use of citruses and floral combination, okay? Citruses and florals are kind of the brilliant 1-2 punch in this fragrance. The citrus notes are bergamot, lemon, and mandarin orange. And as usual, one of the reasons vintage perfume is such an absolute love for me and why I never get tired of wearing and discussing these type of fragrances, even if they don't get the views and the clicks of the newest releases, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me because you know, if you can find a true vintage bottle of this, um, it still holds mystery to me. You know, it's like when I smell this, Rich Mitch reviewed this, and it's funny, he reviewed it a couple years ago, and I told him at the time, this was before I had a channel, I believe, or maybe very early on, but I think it was before I had a channel. So it must have been like 2.5 or going on 3 years ago. But I told him, I said, dude, there's no reviews of this fragrance. You have to review it. This is one of the all-time greats. And he did. He reviewed it. And at the time, he had an exclusive review. Now, I think maybe 1 or 2 people have tried to review it since then. But to me, this is a fragrance that encapsulates what makes perfume so special to me. This is a fragrance that really holds the mystery of fragrance, because I can tell you all the notes and I can tell you how it feels. I can tell you the texture. I can tell you how strong it wears on me. You can see the reaction that I have just wearing it and how all of a sudden up and excited I am to talk about this fragrance. But there's still this mystery. There's this unknown, like looking up at the stars and just wondering, you know, letting your brain run. The mystery here, it's like watching a magic trick to me. And it's like sitting in the crowd and being amazed at how somebody like Houdini can escape such a situation that he puts himself in. And all you can do as an audience member is sit back and clap in awe, you know. And there's that mystery, the mystery. And what's crazy is now fragrance houses, they make such a point for you to want to smell every single note. You know, in the old days, it didn't smell like that. Everything just merged together to form one big giant molecule. Now the molecule can expand and contract, but it all comes together. All of these notes merge together in a way that just gave you Calvin by Calvin Klein, right? And in all of its glory, all of its personality, all of its roughness, all of everything, right? All of it, just bam, in your face. No holds barred. You don't like it, too bad, move on to something else, right? We're not trying to appeal to the lowest common denominator here. And so the mystery for me in Calvin by Calvin Klein is, how in the world can a fragrance that is 45 years old, okay, a fragrance like this can still smell so vibrant, so there, you know? Like you would expect some things to fly off, you know, some citruses to go bad, or maybe you just don't smell citruses. Maybe you just go to this straight musky kind of generic thing. Not this, at least not for me. This bottle was either stored impeccably, and it's a splash too, which is even more potentially dangerous, right? Now, it was perfectly full when I got it, and I bet you I probably used 10 to 15 mils of this since I've had it. I can't see though, but I'm guessing it's something like that. And I'm guessing 10 to 15 mils, maybe even 20. But it just smells like the fragrance has actually grown in strength, if that makes sense, instead of shrunk. And there is nothing shrinking about Calvin by Calvin Klein. This is a fragrance that is chest puffed out, confidence in a bottle to me. And my bottle was, like I said, not the re-release. It was the original because there's no barcode. In fact, look at the price. I don't know if this gives you any idea, but $15 for 100 mils, $15? Now we can't get a decent niche unless you pay at least $300. It's absolutely obscene. So the citrus notes make Calvin basically feel, to me, as fresh as the day it was bottled. But the true genius of Calvin is how this combination of two florals kind of works together in tandem to give you a 1-2 punch. You get the 1-2 punch from the citruses and the florals, but you also get the 1-2 punch from neroli and chamomile. And they add this presence, you know, there's this feeling of like comfort, relaxation, tender and kindness, you know, under a very hard exterior. Tender and kindness is kind of what this fragrance reminds me of. Rich Mitch used the word gentle, and I could completely see that. Like a man with a very hard exterior, but once you get to know him inside, he's a beautiful soul, you know, and you just feel at peace in his presence. You feel safe. You feel like there's trust. You feel like there's friendship. You feel a true connection, which is so rare in today's bullshit, you know, social media world, right? So there is a feeling of sort of staunch and just unembarrassed or unashamed masculinity in all its glory, but not toxic masculinity. This is not spilling over into a bar fight or something like that. I saw an article today about a guy in California who punched a guy at in a bar fight. He punched him once and the guy died. This is not toxic masculinity or fighting. This is a man that's much more a lover than a fighter. But it's definitely a man who stands on his own 2 feet. And you can feel this kind of bitter, earthy, woody green aspect to the fragrance come through, right? And you're thinking fougere, you're thinking lavender, you're thinking tarragon, mixed with this unreal lucid nature. You know, the citrus notes just feel so alive, so unbelievably alive. I don't know if I've ever come across a 45-year-old fragrance that had citrus notes that feel like the citrus notes in Calvin feel. They just feel so lucid in nature. And, you know, finally, as the hours tick by, they start to turn into this woody floral musk fragrance, is basically what it starts drying down to. The floral aspect is slightly sweet because of the combination of chamomile, which can come off as slightly sweetened, almost milky, creamy like feeling, but also green, herbal, and very calming. This is a very calming fragrance for me. Like if I wanted to wear something that was uber masculine but also inviting, you know, because there's a lot of fragrances that are uber masculine. Koros is uber masculine, also from 1981. But is Koros inviting? No. Koros is a lot of things, but I would not call Koros inviting. This walks that line of still giving you that 1981 masculinity while being inviting, while inviting you in, right? And it's almost like drinking a very soothing glass of chamomile tea, right? You just take your voice down an octave, you put your feet up, you relax after a hard day, that kind of thing. The neroli and the orange blossom come in again, and there's both neroli and orange blossom in this, and they add these different hues of green, you know, chopped up green slices to the canvas, if you will. And there's a slight freshness that starts to kind of eke through. There's a slight soapy character that you could easily imagine a man shaving, but instead of using any shaving cream, he's dry shaving with a knife because he's a man's man. You know, there's that kind of, but there's that roughness to it. If you can just imagine dry shaving, it's absolutely unbelievable. Because again, we're dealing with the most manly man in the world here. There's that, okay? But he's also, since it's Father's Day, he's a great father, right? There's that inside. It's not all kick ass and take names. It's not all kick ass and chew bubblegum and I'm all out of bubblegum. It's not that. There's a softer side on the inside to Calvin. So to me, there's this basically like embellished sage note. So I like to go through my whole notes and everything before I actually check out the note listing when I can. Some of these I've seen the note listing so many times that they just pop in my head. But when I smell this, there's almost this embellished feeling of sage that kind of comes through, okay? There's none present according to the note listing, but sage is actually another very calming and meditative note. So we talked about the chamomile, we talked about the soapy shaving aspect. You just instantly think back to being a kid and seeing your dad shaving. There's definitely this calming feeling to that, to me, and very meditative and calming. And sage can sometimes give off this slightly minty undertone. It's not mint like, I actually had some fresh mint today that my mom got for me from her garden, I believe. And there's this slight minty sort of undertone to this fragrance. And it's like running behind the scenes, okay? Aromatic, very peppery and minty. And I think it works right along with that zing, that sharpness, that radiating character to the scent that I was discussing earlier. So, I mean, the fragrance literally stays on my skin all day long. It is the true meaning. I sprayed this on when I left the house at 10 o'clock in the morning today. It's 8 o'clock in the evening. I can smell this. I can smell my spray from this morning. Now, the new one I just did, of course, is overpowering it, but I can still smell it. I can still smell the dried out. And I know there's a lot of things in here in the base that lasts a long time, especially the very textured oak moss, patchouli, and vetiver. Those three, and musk. Those four basically really make this fragrance feel base heavy as it reaches its full dry down. It doesn't just fly off your skin, okay? And so all day it stays on my skin. I'll tell you a funny story about Calvin. One day I was actually wearing it, and I was outside, okay? Goes to show you, my neighbor was next door doing something. He came over and he was like, "Hey man, I can smell you next door. You smell like my uncle." And it kind of made me laugh because, of course, I smell like his uncle. It's a fragrance from whenever his uncle was probably alive, right? So I had to kind of laugh about that one. But I have heard people say that Calvin can be rude. Like if the notes don't click for you, this fragrance can be seen as rude. It can be seen as a bully. It can be seen as discombobulating. It can be seen as harsh Harsh is a word that I've heard thrown around with Calvin a lot. I will say it dries down. If I could, any sort of, I don't know, beef or negative mark that I could take on Calvin would be that it dries down to a standard smelling fougere, the consistency of a vintage masculine from the late 70s, early 80s that you probably have smelled before, right? The dry down is not 100% original, but that's okay. Everything doesn't have to be 100% original. I mean, we're only dealing with so many notes here. There's only so many ways to use geranium and all this stuff and put it all together, right? And so I think one thing, if you like the type of vintage perfume that I like, this will be a win for you. I would almost say, I always tell people to sample, don't blind buy, all that good stuff. You hear people say that all the time. Do as I say, not as I do. This is one where if you have tastes like I have, blind buy this. If you get it for a good deal, absolutely blind buy it. I think this is the type of fragrance that can be like a reference example of a sharp fougere with softer, gentler undertones, as my brother Rich Mitch very smartly picked up on. And the other thing this fragrance will do is it will convince you that the last 15 or 20 years of the whole fragrance industry has felt like a scam, price-wise. Because again, $15. $15. And what's crazy is the oak moss in this keeps humming. Absolutely keeps humming into the dry down. It is a proper, the oak moss we know, it's a perfect showcase. This fragrance is a perfect showcase of what we've lost in the fragrance world, in my opinion. And the citruses last long into the dry down. It's not like the citruses just all of a sudden vanish. The vibrancy of the citrus notes here are unbelievable. You would expect them to disappear and start getting hints of other notes start to come in, but they pop in and out of your peripheral vision with this scent all day long. The vetiver dries down very smoky, but it doesn't feel super dark. It's not like Encre Noir, okay? There's a smokiness to it, but there's also a little bit of a freshness. So that's the contrast in this fragrance to me. You know, the contrast is that sharp opening, one of the sharpest fougères I think I've ever smelled, and then getting those softer, gentler notes like the chamomile, the soapier notes to give you memories of the good old days when you were just wee high, staring at your dad shaving kind of thing. And then the combination of the freshness, the soapier fresh notes with the smokier vetiver and the very textured dark oak moss, very dry as well. The fragrance is very dry. I think the florals add a touch of sweetness, but otherwise it's very dry. So again, to reiterate, one of the strongest colognes in my collection, one of the best from 1981, which is probably one of the best years in vintage perfumery. If I had to rank years, I think 1981 would be at the top, and then 78 would be right below it. And I discovered that Calvin released two fragrances in very similar bottles. One was the original Calvin for women, which came in a red bottle. They call it Calvin Red and Calvin Blue. So a lot of people call this Calvin Blue, by the way. And Calvin Red was released for women in the late 70s and also has a cologne and a Pure Parfum. The Pure Parfum version is extremely expensive, but with how much pop you get with this, I would love to hunt down a cologne bottle of that Calvin Red and just see, excuse me, some of those vintage women scents are absolute stunner knockouts. So that's on my never-ending wish list, but that's kind of my take. Just a all-time great masculine, spicy, green, earthy, woody, floral, all these musky, all these different things. You know, the citruses are amazing. The floral notes are amazing. The blend between, you know, just out and out, unashamed masculinity and softness underneath is amazing. I think it's Calvin Klein's best fragrance for men. Very sad it's discontinued. And I think just a reference of what we lost in the fragrance world since 1981. So that is my thoughts. If you have experience with this, what I'm going to do, this is going to be titled as a Vintage Hall of Fame review, because I do think this is one of the best fragrances Calvin Klein has ever put out. But if you have experience with this gem, I'd love to hear your thoughts. As always, leave a comment. We are coming up on 9,000 subscribers, but still small enough where I can respond to each and every one of you. So I hope every single dad, father out there had a fantastic Father's Day. Thanks for watching, commenting, liking, subscribing, all the amazing stuff you guys do to help the channel. As always, it's a pleasure. Cheers, guys, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.